Okay, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Christianity on the Spectrum. This is a podcast of around 12 years of ethnographic research into autistic online communities and subcommunities, focusing on ASD1 and Christian and ex-Christian subcommunities. And on this podcast, we like to talk about things like autism and Christianity, and every time now, this is sort of a trend. Every time something stupid happens in the autism discourse, I bring Etana on and we talk about it. And this is probably going to continue.
Yeah, I don't mind. I love stupid. I'm good at it.
So we've got another episode for you on autism discourse and where we think it went wrong. So in previous episodes, we discussed Uta Frith, and then we discussed Woody Brown and facilitated communication. And now we are going in a completely different direction, and we are talking about the detransitioning autistics. Not detransitioning from their gender identity, detransitioning from autism specifically. Yeah, so Christina Buttons, for those who don't know, is a journalist who has focused most of her work on detransition, like transgender detransition. And I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, but I've read much of it and I'm not super impressed. Is my overall takeaway.
I went through a period where I was reading about this a lot. Yeah, I probably should write more about this because I had a terrible period of OCD around transness. Like that's something that I probably should talk about at some point. But during that period, I went through this period of like trying to look through everything I could find about like transness and every single opinion. And one of the people I found was Christina Buttons. And she said, she would always bring up her Asperger's and use that in her, arguments about detransition. Now, I always found that stuff, the way she was talking it tended to be like some of the science they would refer to wasn't wrong or anything, but it was always this very formulaic story that had all these very formulaic stories of detransition girls. It always had a lot of holes in it. I always preferred, like, if I was going, like, I always had so many questions when I would hear these stories because it always seemed like these girls are reading from a script. Like maybe they were reading from a script when they transitioned, but they're also reading from a script now that they've detransitioned. I don't want to make this too much about detransition because I don't know enough about it, but it was very similar to just most of the conservative stuff about detransition.
I will also say shout out Kinnan McKinnon for
McKinnon was a really good guest.
Doing his research. I think of all the people who you should be reading and listening to about detransition, he's, I think, the best one out there. So I have an episode with him. You should check that out. Anyway, yeah, Christina Buttons. She wrote an article with the Free Press called "I Thought I Was Autistic, period. I was wrong."
Oh, God.
And it was certainly a thing to behold. Reading through the article, I was just like, man, I have so many questions about where you formulated your ideas and how you came to hold the opinions specifically about what you do. And then I read through all of her comments on Twitter on that article where she was arguing with people.
Yeah.
And I went, this answers fewer questions than I was hoping and probably creates another 30 additional questions that I had. And then finally, she went and she did an interview with the former head of the Daily Wire, Jeremy Boring. And that interview was better in terms of answering the questions that were left unanswered in the article. So we're also going to talk about that interview and the surrounding discourse of stuff she has put out since. It is, I don't know. I was never particularly fond of the way that she covered detrans stuff. I thought it lacked nuance and lacked a lot of specificity, not just specificity, but also like complications to narratives and things like that you should expect to be seeing that just weren't there, and a lot of like reading multiple groups of people as one single hegemonic group. And it's just like, I don't think you either don't understand this as well as you think you do, or you do understand it and you are intentionally leaving out the nuance for ideological reasons, and I don't know which one is worse. And I felt the same way with this piece.
Because she's writing it as if she's a detransitioner. It's the same structure of most of these really popular detransitioner articles where there's a lot of stuff that's a lot of complications are removed. It's really well manufactured to fit a specific narrative, but it also will like sort of put things in that like it's very obvious in a lot of these stories where someone detransitioned and it's clear what motivated them is they just don't believe that they actually changed sex, and they don't want to say that, so they try to go with like all these. With her, she doesn't really believe autism is a thing, but she can't say that. Like she can't really fully say that. She at the very
To
least doesn't believe
clarify,
it.
just
Yeah,
to jump in to clarify, she doesn't believe level 1 autism is a
right.
thing. She makes it very clear that she believes that severe autism or profound autism is a thing. Anyway, sorry, continue.
My problem with that is, of course, that like I don't think you can actually not
No, it's an
disbelieve.
incoherent point.
It's a completely incoherent point. If you think about it for a few minutes, there is no way to disbelieve in level 1 autism without basically realizing, okay, then it's not a real disease at all. Then
Yeah,
these are just intellectually disabled kids. Because if that, I know it you can't like you are cutting off a lot of the criteria for diagnosing level 2 and level 3 kids
yeah,
as autistic. you know
yeah.
um so
It's absolutely one of those person sawing off the branch they are sitting on
right.
scenarios without realizing that they're doing that, and thinking that everything they're doing is fine, just sort of not realizing that she's undermining her own argument as she makes it.
It's almost closer to like the article, like the original detransitioner articles initially, where they were coming out and they would say, oh, there's real trans and then there's us and we're the fake ones, or we were caught up in a contagion, but there's the real ones and they have real dysphoria. And I don't want to get into that again, but it was a very specific type style of rhetoric that she seems to be trying to transplant onto autism, where there's the real autism and then there's the fake autism. That's just the contagion. And yeah.
Yeah. And so this is one of those things where I try to take her very seriously, like despite the fact that I'm like, I don't I don't think you have contributed much to the discourse in the past. I'm like, you know what? I think you deserve a fair shake and a fair shot. And I do this with everyone. So, like Robert Chapman is a guy that I have critiqued a few times. And I feel like she is doing what Robert Chapman does, but on the right wing instead of the left wing, where it's like you start out with a really good idea, or you start out with a premise that is sort of just uncontrovertibly true if you look at the state of the field and if you look at the data, and then you run with it. And where you run with it, it's like, okay, you're good. And then like you get 70% of the way through and it's like, wow, this is really good coherent analysis. But then the final 30%, you just like take a complete left and it's like, okay, well now this point is bad because that last 30% that you just tacked onto here doesn't actually work, and it doesn't make sense, and it makes the beginning 70% of your critique that had valid points in it, it makes it less valid because you were basically the entire foundation you have set up is there to make a bad point. And it's just that over and over and over in the interview and in the article that she wrote and in all of the comments that I've seen she's written. It's just like, you were so close to making a really interesting point, and somehow you managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory every single time you were doing it. And I think a lot of it is because she's trying to force a narrative. Like she's really trying to force parallels between this and transgender and this and detransition. And it's like this isn't that. Like you're they're not the same thing, and
Yeah.
I don't know, like I will be the last person to accuse someone of overstretching a metaphor. That's like kind of my thing, right? but like at a certain point you need to be self-aware that you're overstretching this metaphor, and that these two things aren't actually the same. And that's basically it. Like my alternative titles for this episode was like, I'll just read out a bunch of them that I had
Okay.
brainstormed. Woman who still has autism pretends she doesn't have autism because she doesn't understand what autism is. Girl with the spurgiest accent in the world. Yeah, I don't have autism because I developed social skills in my 30s, which is a totally normal time for that and not indicative of a delay. Woman who is bad at understanding detransitioning. Detransitions from autism, also doesn't understand that particularly
Oh
well.
God.
And finally, she could have made some really interesting points and salient critiques if she wasn't talking about autism from the peak of Dunning-Kruger Mountain. And that's that's basically, that sort of sums up my analysis here.
Yeah. Also, I will say the Free Press article, as confusing as it is, probably more convincing than the interview, because the interview, she talks. And when she talks, it's a lot harder to pretend that what she's like, that she does not have something. And I feel like even the interviewer is like, okay, you got like aware that she's got something. Like he's like, okay, this is a person who has some diagnosable condition, is what he's thinking.
She has at least stage 2 autism voice.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, like there
It's a
are
monotone.
it's very
There's,
slow.
yeah,
It's drawn out.
it
There,
stops, it
yeah,
starts, it's I mean, I'm impressed. I'm kind of like very impressed that she managed to actually do any of this stuff and become a journalist, because she does have such a very like stereotypical voice in that way. So like I'm
yes.
impressed that she got that far, and I'm not trying to like be cruel to her. Like that is actually genuinely
Yeah,
impressive, but
we
it's,
both have level 2 Spurg voice.
yes, yes. Believe me, this is like, I really did not let myself be recorded that much before. Like the one time I let myself be recorded before doing these podcasts was a short film a guy I was dating was animating about autism. So like that was the one time I did a voice acting thing, like because I thought, it was about autism. So
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
yeah,
and like it's, if you've spent any time with autistic women,
yeah,
like you hear 30 seconds of her talk, and if you have spent a bunch of time with it, you'd be like, oh yes, I recognize this exact cadence,
yeah.
voice, tone, and intonation. I have heard it 1,000 times. And this is yeah, it's one of those things where the interview, it's like, okay, I had watched some of her interviews like several years prior, just because she talked a lot about autism and D-trans stuff, and I wanted to know what the people were saying. And I remember her saying that she had Asperger's or autism, and that was the thing she brought up all the time. And
Yeah.
I never once went, but do you? I
Yeah, no,
always
I
went, yeah,
immediately
that
was like,
checks out.
"Oh, okay, she definitely does." Like, I was, like,
Yep,
clearing her, like, "Oh, yeah, 5 5 seconds of
yeah.
hearing her,"
Or I would
you
hear
know?
her and go, does this girl have autism? And then she'd be like, and I have autism. And be like, yes.
Yeah,
Okay, that makes sense.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, she very, like, the sort of, I thought I had autism, I was wrong, is so clearly just like not true. And she
yeah.
also knows it's not true, right?
She
Like,
says
yeah,
she fits the criteria, and it's funny because, like, she's definitely pulling on a group of people that exist, which is people who self-diagnose, people who doctor shop and late in life, and it's very obvious that either they're broad autism phenotype at best or not autistic at worst, and they have like something else. But like she's not that she's clearly not that type of
yes,
person, and she's trying to be that type of person, and she's trying to model a sort of uh a sort of like way for those people. Maybe she's trying to model a way for them to like switch grifts, because there are a lot of people using that as sort of a grift. But I don't think those people are going to do that, because the people who tend to do that are usually very left wing. They're very,
yes,
unless they have some kind of like deconversion moment or a moment of like, oh, this isn't like, almost they're really cynical people who are going to just switch when they run out of money or run out of an audience, or if they're people who actually are going to just go through a massive shift in their consciousness, they're not going to do this. It's not like detransition where people have multiple reasons for detransitioning, and then they fall into this niche of these are the people who are going to listen to me. I have to, and they maybe make their stories a little more suitable for profit. It's not like it can be, detransition can be a grift, but it's not always like pure grift. There are detransitioners. The only people who would be into this are people who want it as a grift, and I don't know, it's difficult to exactly, I get what her person, like, she's ideologically motivated. I'm not saying that she is purely a grifter, because I don't think she is, but
Yeah,
I think
I
she's
don't think she's a grifter. I
I
think
think
she is genuine and sincere
yes.
in her thoughts, and that she just isn't thinking about this particularly well.
No, I think she's in a milieu where there are people who are encouraging this to her, encouraging
Yes.
her to say, "Oh, you don't have this. This is for real. Like, this is like, these are really, this is for like really affected people." And I think it's something she's trying to fit into. And yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah,
It is very notable, like you said, though,
yeah,
she isn't actually one of those people
no,
who they are targeting,
no,
who they are
no,
like, you don't actually have autism.
yeah,
Like, if she has, like, she says that she meets the DSM-5
hmm,
criteria for level 1 autism, I believe it. There is nothing there that has made me go, I don't think you do. And I say that to a lot of people. I say that about a lot of people.
yeah,
I am not afraid to say it. I am not afraid to question these types of things. She is not one of, there are a lot of people who get misdiagnosed. Or, sorry, I don't know if there are a lot. There are people who get misdiagnosed with ASD1 who should have gotten a differential. She is not one of them. Like,
yeah,
they did what was on the label. When she says she's wrong, it becomes really clear that what she means by I was wrong is that she just doesn't particularly like the label.
yeah.
And that's what she means by she was wrong. And it's like, cool, don't like the label. You
I
can,
don't really like the label. Like, I stopped liking the label a couple of years ago.
yeah.
It was like and I went through a period sort of similar to her where I thought, okay, maybe I'm like, I don't like this label. I don't think it's coherent. Maybe I'm really not autistic. And then I quickly figured out, no, that whatever they diagnosed me with was correct. It's just a very broad label, and I don't like that broadness.
Yeah,
It's it's
exactly. It isn't that anyone was wrong about it.
yeah.
It's that she doesn't like the particular insinuations of what it means to have that, and sort of the community that has spawned up
Oh,
around autism. And it's like, so true, Queen.
yes.
Like,
I don't like
valid
it.
critiques. Super valid points you are making here. These are perfectly reasonable things for you to say. There is a lot of unhelpfulness and a lot of stupidity in autism communities around autism and thinking about autism. Uh, I have written extensively about it on my Substack if you want to go hear more. But instead of her embracing the light of post neurodiversity, she has instead decided to go down the dark path of detransition from autism, which I personally think is a very funny thing.
Yeah.
Detransition is a medical process, right? It is a medical and social process where you take hormones and then you stop doing that, or you are
Change your
medically
name.
yes.
And you change your name back. You change your
Yes.
pronouns. You change your pronouns back. Change clothing, and you change your clothing back. Like, there are
Yep.
physical things
There
that you
has been no
change.
change here.
Right.
The only change seems to be a perspective shift,
Yeah.
which is, to be clear, super cool. you should change your perspective on these types of things, especially if you're in toxic, extremely online neurodiversity communities who refuse to
Right.
think critically about autism. You should change that perspective. That's a bad perspective to have. I would prefer if she changed it to a better perspective that wasn't just wrong about most things. But that's my own thoughts. But yeah, so her general trajectory that she describes both in the article and in the interview is she had a lot of issues. Like, and this becomes especially clear in the interview. She had a lot of social integration issues and behavioral issues and things like that growing up, like many autistic people. And like she talks about hospitalizations and
IEP,
yeah,
short bus.
IEPs being on the short bus.
Oh, the short bus. I didn't even have
Like,
to do the short bus. Jeez.
yeah,
I
exactly.
understand why she'd be. I kind of understand that perspective of I don't want to have autism if you had to do something like ride a short bus, which has so much like stigma to it. Like
Yeah.
that is, ooh, that,
And
yeah.
yeah, and she basically talks about having a life of isolation, a lot of trauma, a
Hmm.
lot of like
Grooming, I
really,
think.
yep, yep, grooming, basically all the things that sort of happen to autistic women.
Yeah.
Just everything she said. It's like, yep, that checks every box. That is, yep, that's what's going on. And then she talks about how she sort of started to go online and find out about autism, and her only previous experience with autism was like level 3 and working with other people with severe disabilities, like I think she mentions Angelman's and
Yeah,
other things
Angelman's.
like that. And she talks about how like that was her conception of autism, and then she goes online and finds this new community again, just like the trans people. Anyway,
Yeah.
it's sort of like, I don't
It's a
know,
bit calculated. Oh, I went
have
online for this. It's
it feels like a conversion story. Like it feels like an evangelical come to Jesus conversion story where they hit all the right beats in line, and it's like, okay, I know what you're doing. This is clearly narrativized. Anyway, this actually happens in real life though, so it is completely plausible that this is actually the sequence of events that happened to her. It is just the way it is presented in a particular way, in a particular narrative. But anyway, so she has all these problems, goes online and learns about girl autism,
yes,
and
the
then
female
goes
phenotype.
I've got girl autism. And she goes to the psychiatrist, she gets diagnosed, and immediately she gets this emotional payoff where all of her failures and past traumas and issues aren't because of her or any like personality defect. They're because of a neurodevelopmental disorder. And she talks about all the times that she was in hospital and treatment centers and found this very comforting. And this happens all the time. This is a
Yeah,
normal thing for late diagnosed people.
yeah.
It's
This
like,
this this is what happened to me. Like when I
yep,
first got it, I wish I hadn't had. I like it's a normal reaction to have because when I was 17 and I got that diagnosis, it was like it was a shock and then a relief, and it was a bit too much of a relief because I probably should have followed up with a lot of different things that I didn't
yep,
follow up with.
same.
But that's not really necessarily a problem with the diagnosis so much as
Yes.
it is that the doctors don't really have a standardized treatment plan for this or for
Yeah.
any of this. It's a label they give you and it's to help you and it can help you with insurance, but you're on your own in how you want to deal with it. At least that was what my perspective. Like once you're a teenager, if you've made it to your teen years without being diagnosed and then afterwards you get diagnosed, you are kind of on your own in terms of
Yep.
like what do you want to do with it. And
And
people are going to
um,
make really bad decisions with that a lot of the time.
and
you know
unfortunately, what people do immediately after getting diagnosed is they go online
yes.
to find other
They go
autistic
online.
people. And who do they encounter first? Guys on Reddit being like, you should read Devin Price's Unmasking Autism. It'll change your life. Um, and,
Yeah.
and yeah, that is an unhelpful book.
Yeah.
Uh, that like read it. I don't begrudge people who read it and like feel seen and moved for the first time. But it's one of those things where it's like, I'll give you a 2-week grace period for you to feel the things that you need to feel and get this out of your system. But you need to get this out of your system in 2 weeks. After reading the book, you get a 2-week grace period. And then after that, I'm going to start asking you a lot of really critical questions about why you find this so comforting. Because like a lot of the neurodiversity community is a hug box.
Yes.
And like a kind of stupid hug box. So recently I was sent a screenshot by a friend of a group that she is in on Facebook. And the person in it was clearly describing the signs of late onset MS.
Oh.
Like they were describing the tingling sensations and like loss of motor control and a whole bunch of stuff like that. And they were like, I discovered my late stage neurodivergence. I actually have autism and this is a motor issue. And people were in the comments like, oh, you need to learn to unmask. And it's like, girl, you have MS. I don't actually know if she has MS, but she is like, you are describing neurological degenerative symptoms. This is not unmask your neurological degeneration. This is go see a neurologist, please, for the love of God. But like, you go on these Facebook groups and that's what you get, right? You get this sort of uncritical positivity. Everyone's valid. We need to learn to unmask. You show up and go into these like late diagnosed autism support group Zoom calls. Have you ever been on any of those?
No, because I think by the time that all that stuff started, the thing with me is like I read Neurotribes, which I guess is the unmasking autism of its time, except it probably doesn't deserve to be compared to that. But that's sort of what it was. It was the book you read.
Much better.
It is much better sourced.
Still not great, but better.
But like I read it. There were some things that made me uncomfortable because at the time it was like, I think the valorization of Silicon Valley, like at the time I was like, even then I was sort of being skeptical of the sort of valorization of Silicon Valley. That was a big part of it. But
in retrospect, that is the funniest thing in the world. Where Neurotribes is like super pumped up on like liberal tech optimism and how Elon Musk is gonna save us. And now
it wasn't even Elon. It's just like that whole scene, and it makes complete sense actually that why neurodiversity got so big during that period is because that is the period where you have this melding of Silicon Valley with this sort of Obama era liberalism and liberal optimism, and that was at its absolute height. Everyone loves Steve Jobs, everyone loves Bill Gates, everyone loves these tech billionaires. So autistic people are going to save the world, and then life happens. So and
now autistic people are reviving the Nazi movement on Twitter. Hell yeah.
But the thing is, like, at least with me, I don't think I think what happened was just I got into it. I think I was lucky enough that like around 2015 I stumbled upon facilitated communication, and that quickly I began to get into arguments that very quickly alienated me from the kind of people who would get me into late diagnosed groups. So I think I was just very lucky, and I just stumbled upon a type of like obsession that managed to alienate me from everyone by questioning it. So if I hadn't really discovered that, I would have gotten probably very sucked in and very much more involved than I would have. I was a true believer for a long time, for longer than that, but I was always very annoyed with certain aspects, and the Devon Price aspect always annoyed me. I understand that. But
so I've attended those for research purposes. I only started attending them when I started doing the autism research, and I was just like, what are these guys up to nowadays? Like what happens to newly diagnosed people? And then I like show up on the Zoom call, I'm like, whoa, this is bad. This is terrible advice. Wow. I'm not going to say that because this is not my meeting to run, but it this is not good. And yes, so like, yeah, you do get this immediate relief, and then usually you get into a hug box,
Yes.
like an online hug box of people who will be uncritically affirming of everything you do, and how, autistic people are just only oppressed,
Mhm.
and we need to liberate ourselves from the neurotypicals or capitalism, whichever like branch
Yeah.
of people you find yourself in. And yeah, it can be very, very comforting. But one thing that she points out is that she turned her social struggles into symptoms, and she was like, I forgive myself for the past mistakes that I've made, which honestly,
That's a good
pretty
thing.
good thing to do. You should
That's
do
a
that.
very good thing.
But
Like,
she sort of talks about that like it's a bad thing. Like, oh
yeah.
no, I was doing that. And then she was like, it provided me with a community. And the critique that she brings up is it shifted things from self-improvement and we need to get better and we need to do things better to this is fixed in your neurology. There's nothing you can do about it. You are the way you are. Unmask your autism, girl boss. That type of thing. And
That's
like,
really, that's interesting. What's interesting is that has nothing to actually do with the diagnosis. It has to do
yes,
with the community that grew up around the diagnosis. It has to do with the lack of really people who diagnose you actually giving you a very structured. If you're autistic and you want structure, you're not going to get structure with a diagnosis, and
yep,
I think that's sort of a problem. They assume that you will do what you like. If you now that you have the self-knowledge of your autism, you're immediately going to do whatever's best for you, and you might not do that with
yeah.
autism. Like, it's yeah.
And like some of us manage to do that. Some of us, it takes a while to
It took me
figure
10
out.
years. Like,
Yeah,
it took me 10 whole years.
it took me around the same amount of time. Like
Yeah.
I often say an embarrassingly large amount of time to
Yeah.
figure it out. But eventually I did. And like you said, the reason it happens is because it's just like, here's your autism diagnosis. Welcome to the deep end. Kick you in
Right.
the chest. Hope you have fun swimming. And so, of course, you're going to grab onto whatever life raft is near you. Getting a diagnosis is pretty destabilizing. It feels weird.
Yes.
Like, and then you go through this like 6 weeks to like 6 months of just epiphany after epiphany where you're like, oh no, is this autism?
Yeah.
And the answer is sort of like,
Maybe.
well, yes and no.
Yeah.
Like pretty much every symptom you're going to come up with is like everything in your life that you're going to come up with is probably touched by autism somewhere, right? Like this is a pervasive neurodevelopmental disorder that you've had your whole life. Most of your life is probably colored by this. However, it is not all autism.
Yeah.
There is still a lot of other not autism involved. And so you go through like these sort of rapid stages of epiphanies where you just start like realizing and also start being like, wait, so most people don't have this
Yeah.
experience. And it's a very odd thing. And so you get this community of other people who have gone through that, who themselves probably have a lot of maladaptive coping mechanisms that they have not unpacked. Editing John here, but you know who doesn't have a lot of maladaptive coping mechanisms that they don't need to unpack because they never developed them in the first place? That's right, the Against Malaria Foundation, the organization for which this podcast is currently running a fairly successful fundraiser for. If you appreciate this podcast or would like to support any of my work, please consider donating to the Against Malaria Foundation in the link found in the show notes. This is very important work, and it genuinely motivates me to keep on producing podcasts and podcast episodes. If anything I have done has been helpful to you, please do consider donating, as it both saves lives and helps me continue on doing this work. Yeah,
Yeah.
because no one comes in and is like, hey brother,
Yes.
don't do this. This is but you find a niche of other people who were
Yeah.
like maladaptive in the exact same way that you're maladaptive, and instead of doing something about it, you just devolve into being much worse than you currently are. This
Yeah.
absolutely happens. And this is one of the things where she brings up a good point and then ends up taking it to a very stupid place. Because what she brings up next is the broadening of the autism concept. And this is something we might spend a little bit of time on.
Yeah.
Like she points out some helpful things, but also just misses a whole lot of nuance and sort of doesn't understand the history of how autism got to be the way that it is.
Yeah.
And because she's missing a lot of this very critical history, she just gets things wrong
Mm-hmm.
and also doesn't do crucial things like differentiate between self-diagnosis and
Gnosis.
clinical late
Yeah.
diagnosis. And so when she talks about overdiagnosis, a lot of the evidence she gives is from blended communities of self-diagnosed and late diagnosed
Yeah.
from clinics. And it's like autism communities online accept self-diagnosis and your
Because there's no
critique.
other, like, you can't really
Exactly.
check.
Exactly. I mean, that's why I use self-diagnosis for my research, because it's like I'm not looking at your medical records, and so if someone tells me they're autistic, I'm just going to be like, all right, I do more due diligence than that.
I
Like
think you do a
it's
good job.
it's
Yeah.
it's pretty obvious when they're not.
It helps
Like
to
I've
talk face to face. It
yeah,
helps to just, yeah.
and like I've done over 600 interviews at this point in my life. I've got a pretty good feel for what is autism and what is not. But like the point she brings up is like useful. So let's talk about the first thing, which is the expansion of the autism diagnosis. And this is the one that frustrates me. The expansion has happened at every level of the autism diagnosis. She is like,
She brings up
guys,
Angelman syndrome and Fragile X and Down
yeah,
syndrome, and those are not ever, were not the original, like, that was the original diagnosis. Explicitly left out people who had
yeah,
those conditions. Like, that's sorry, that's just,
you could not get a Down syndrome and autism differential
yeah.
before DSM-5. Like they were not diagnosed together. You had Down syndrome. You didn't have Down syndrome and autism if you had Downs. And just like this is where it's like I think you probably should have done more reading about the history of autism diagnosis, because one point that I think is very important to make is there is one type of autism, one category of autism that has been relatively stable since its discovery, who, if you read the initial clinical notes of these people, you would go like, oh yes, I know exactly which cohort of autistic people you are talking about from your diagnostic notes from 1940s Austria.
Yeah.
And that
Is
is
Asperger's.
Asperger's syndrome. That is the only diagnosis of autism that has been stable, where the initial description of it is pretty much exactly what it is today, with some minor adjustments. Like
If you want to stretch it back to the 1920s, the Sukareva stuff
yeah,
is all level 1, all Asperger's type of stuff. Obviously, Asperger's criteria is
yeah,
probably actually more severe than a lot of what Sukareva was looking at, but
yeah,
still, it's still Asperger's. You know?
exactly. So like 80 to 100 years of stable characterization and categorization for a particular type of autism. If you go through what Connor described, like the Connor syndrome stuff, it is not what we call profound autism. You would
No.
not be able to derive what we have for like the profound and severe autism by looking at Connor syndrome notes.
You get a lot of level 2s with Connor, a lot of language issues. The language issues are kind of something that he really emphasizes, but they're not there. I don't think there's a lot of emphasis of like these really destructive behaviors. Like they're stimming. I don't know. Like I've read through a little bit of it, enough of it, and you get some kids who are a lot of these kids were institutionalized, but they would not be institutionalized today, is basically the thing. These are kids who would be institutionalized in the 50s and today would be in special ed. Some of them would grow up to be to get to a level 1. Some of them would just live in group homes. These are not children who would be like in under like 24-hour care today. You would have a pretty decent way of handling most of them. You know,
Exactly. And if you are going to play the very stupid game
yeah,
of which autism is fake autism, there is an answer to that.
yeah,
And it's not the one she wants. To be clear, this is a stupid game, and it doesn't make
yes,
any sense to play this game because, like, what is actually autism? It
yeah,
is a cluster of externally grouped behaviors. That's what it is. It is a set of external behaviors that we go, okay, we see these sort of consistent patterns across these populations. This is the label that we're going to give for it. That's all it is. But the expansion of what is autism, again, most of what Connor described was an incredibly rare thing in his eyes. What
yeah,
Asperger described was something that he thought was fairly common. Right? Like
hmm
he explicitly said that he thought it's actually fairly common in the population, and there are lots of people who have these traits. Like he has a famous quote that's something like a dash of autism or a dash of Asperger's is essential to success in the sciences or something like that.
yeah. And even Connor's study, which he thinks it's very rare, but he also is constantly mentioning, oh, and the parents have this, and the parents are like this, and they're
Yep.
like, and it's very obvious that he's noticing traits in the parents and relatives of the family.
We get broad autism phenotype from Connor.
Yes, like that is
Like,
the
anyway,
um and I think one thing that was, so that's sort of what, yeah,
yeah.
what we're going to continue,
It,
yeah,
so yeah, so we'll move on from this. I just
yes,
wanted to make that point
no,
because
it's,
that is a thing that just is just like talk about this.
yeah,
Please mention like she talks about this expansion as if it's only happening on ASD1,
it is happening
and
everywhere.
it has happened everywhere,
There were
and
never,
every criteria has been expanded.
like, if you read like a lot of the way people talked about autism, like, and a lot of the rhetoric around autism was based on these kids look normal. That was a very, like, a thing that was heavily emphasized. It's emphasized by Uta Frith, I think, in some of her works, like these look like normal children. And the parent and the whole idea of autism as something that was your children are stolen from you. It's because these aren't children who are these are children who look normal, who are looking normal at birth, who don't have physical features that mark them as different. At least that was the stereotype. Now, I don't think that's always been the case. It's probably never always been the case, but there was, for the most part, there was the way it was defined in the 20th century. It was something that looked. It didn't externally, like, they physically didn't look like they had a genetic disorder.
Yeah, and so it's like really really important to emphasize the idea that, like, well, they've changed autism to just let anyone in.
Yeah,
Uh, that is true, but out to just let anyone in on every level.
yeah,
Like the number of, anyway, so I won't belabor this point. I just wanted to point that out. The thing that she points out that I thought was worth discussing a lot more and that you thought was worth
yes.
discussing a lot more is the idea of the female phenotype. And this is, yeah,
I
so
remember encountering this, like, because when I was looking for why wasn't I diagnosed, blah, blah, and, part of what I came upon was, oh, it's probably because you're a girl, and you're a girl who didn't show this type of stereotypical symptoms. And some of that's true. The lack of externalizing behaviors, I guess, is a big thing. I didn't really show in my case, I didn't really show many externalizing behaviors until I was a teenager and puberty hit. And then I started actually being very externalizing in a way that was not very, was probably should have gotten me diagnosed sooner. But my point is, like, the female phenotype, it's one of those things that it's mostly spread around online. I'm sure that I'm sure you can find actual scientific papers mentioning it, but the way it got disseminated online, it came to mean a broad coalition of people who clearly don't have it, girls who have no symptoms at all. And then the other side of that coalition is girls who clearly have it, but they didn't they were feminine. I think that's, or at least that's what I like. They were feminine acting and feminine looking and had feminine interests. And I suspect that a big part of the whole female phenotype thing is just a lot of it means pretty, a lot of it means feminine. It means not butch. And I don't think it's a coincidence that for a long time the embodiment of female autism was Temple Grandin. That someone like Temple Grandin, and it took her a while to get diagnosed too, but like it, for a long time that was the image of, was someone who was very noticeably, not just noticeably autistic, but noticeably not
Gender
very feminine.
non-conforming.
Yes, gender
Yes.
non-conforming. And someone like Christina Buttons, she she doesn't really mask very well. I mean, no, she doesn't camouflage, she doesn't mask. She says she camouflaged, like she says like, oh, I must have camouflaged, or like I was convinced I had camouflaged and masked. But I think she was just pretty. Like she was very pretty. She was very susceptible to being groomed online. I'm not going to go into her past because a lot of people have used that to like attack her in ways that are kind of gross. But like she was just very pretty, and I think that I think there's something about being feminine that I think is like, I think people see it as masking, but it's not. You can be, if you're very feminine looking but don't and have certain feminine behaviors, but you're still not very social, it gets portrayed as masking. But wearing makeup isn't masking. Like dressing pretty isn't masking. It just seems like that because we associate like, I guess with women it's very hard for people to separate appearance from behavior, I think, compared to men. Like I think a lot of people have a hard time with that. I mean, this is just probably a tangent, but I think that's something that happens. And I think the female phenotype autism, some of it made sense when it was talking about like, oh, you're more internalizing. Okay, but there are internalizing men. Like there are a lot of internalizing men as well. I think a lot of it is a way of sort of half, like a good portion does seem to be like, to some extent it made like a lot of one of the reasons I started hating masking discourse was like because it seemed to let professionals off the hook for just not diagnosing women who had obvious traits because they just didn't think women could have it, or they thought it was just not, or didn't want to give it to women because it wasn't. I don't know. I think pretty and feminine, it tripped up a lot of professionals who are looking for a gender non-conforming woman and looking for someone who is not appealing to men. And because I think that there's something about, I mean, I think there's a desire not to label women like that as autistic because it's going to ruin their lives or their prospects, or like, and they can grow out of it, or they'll just get married. Like I think this is like not a fully formed hypothesis, but I do think like not enough people interrogated the whole female phenotype thing, and that's why it got so disseminated to be like, oh, if you just don't have to have any symptoms at all, like because a lot of people who get called like girl autism, they do have symptoms. They actually do have like I don't think I had girl autism. Like maybe I did have more feminine traits, but I don't know.
So I think that is very true. And it is, to me, it's sort of like trivially true, just based on like the amount of contact that I've had with autistic women. Like, and it gets very frustrating for me to talk about this. We'll have to do a whole separate episode on masking and masking discourse because it's so stupid. Autistic women think they're way better at masking than they actually are if they have autism. Like if they actually have autism, a lot of them will be like, yeah, I'm just so high masking. It's like, girl, you are not high masking. You're just like attractive. And
you wear makeup.
People put up with you. Like, and it's just like, you have managed to skirt by everything because people just weren't looking for it in you. My sister-in-law is a great example of this. My sister-in-law is a conventionally attractive woman. Like, from most objective standards, you'd see a picture and you'd be like, oh yeah, this woman definitely has a curated Instagram feed. Like, I don't know how else to say it, but like, she's like, by normal Western beauty standards, she fits that. She is the most stereotypical autistic woman I've ever met in my life. Like, she, it's like, she masks, but she doesn't actually hide her autism.
Right.
Is the easiest way to say it. She does so many things that are so externally obvious as autism to anyone who knows what autism looks like.
Yep.
If, however, you were to compare her to an autistic man,
Yeah.
she would look very different, because that's just like, compare her to to a non-autistic woman, and it's like, oh yeah, that girl has autism. And
But
it's
compared to
very
an
obvious.
autistic man,
Well, compared to a normal man, it'd
yes.
be like, oh, she's just like a bit odd,
Yes.
and
Yeah,
I
and a
think,
lot of it was easy to be around for me to be around men a lot of the time starting in puberty because and it's specifically because they don't notice anything. Like, they're not looking for differences between you. You can be one of the guys and they won't notice. You can be attractive to them and they won't notice. They're just not looking for that.
yeah,
Um, I will say,
whereas women do absolutely
oh,
look for those
yeah,
things.
yeah. Women absolutely notice, and once, like, in my case, that really hit hard once I left my, like, sort of bubble of friends that sort of took me in and had to go to a very separate high school where I had to start socializing all over again, and it was very obvious. And I think what one part of what made me sort of have this realization about, are you masking or are you just attractive, is that there were like two periods in my life where I had like when where I had these almost like gender non-conforming phases, and they both kind of coincide with diagnoses. Like, in one point where I, like, around 7, I think around 8 or 7, I cut my hair short, and I mean, I wasn't wearing pants to school because I was in a religious school, but I do think I was a bit more like gender non-conforming suddenly, and that is around the time I was diagnosed with OCD. That made sense because my OCD had been smoldering for a while. But what was particularly, but it's interesting to me because the second period is when I had to leave a private school and go to public school. And when I did that, and I had been in the private school, I'd been wearing makeup. Like, I'd been trying to, like, I'd had friends, I was trying to wear makeup regularly. I go to public school, I can wear pants now, so I start wearing pants. I don't wear makeup, I don't do any of that. That is that eventually, like, I got diagnosed in the like a couple years later, and that period was when, like, was when my mother started suspecting my autism more, because I wasn't following friend groups and doing the things that make you look pretty. It wasn't that my mother had suspected it long before this had happened, but I think it was I think there is something about being able to keep looking presentable that really does insulate you from it. And if you go through a period where you don't look presentable and you don't look as, like, as put together, it can suddenly it feel I think people will start to notice more. And it wasn't so I don't know, I can't say that that's the reason, because I had a lot of issues throughout my whole childhood and my whole adolescence. But those were the periods where I think of myself as unmasking, and they're the periods where I wasn't performing, like, I wasn't dressing very feminine, is the periods where I felt like I was unmasking. And that is just something very interesting to me, and it does feel like, and as soon, like, there was a period where I really thought that I was masking very well, or that I had almost gotten over autism a couple years ago, and eventually I realized I just learned how to put on makeup correctly. I realized, oh no, I actually just figured out I just finally figured out how to use makeup the right way, and how to dress myself. Appearance really overshadows a lot of things with women.
I think this is true. I cannot prove that this is true. I strongly suspect that you are right, mostly because I talk to so many women who call themselves high masking,
Yeah,
and they are just not.
they're
Like
just
they
pretty or
just
feminine.
are not high masking. They have very obvious external signs of autism, but because they're like in the range of conventionally attractive, they no one sort of suspects it and no one sort of expects a lot from that. But there's this other cohort in it.
Yeah.
And there's this other cohort that is also typically, there are actually like two other cohorts.
Yeah.
There's one that's also conventionally attractive, but shows no signs of autism.
Yeah.
Or at the very best is the lowest registerable version of broad autism phenotype. And they go, oh, I'm actually autistic because I was masking.
Oh.
And now I need to unmask. And it's like, no, you weren't masking. You just don't have it.
Yeah.
The reason they didn't see it is because it's literally invisible.
Right.
Autism is an external set of behaviors. You have none of them. But they're like, Christina Buttons is one of these women who very obviously has external manifesting signs and symptoms. But there is a whole other group who does not have that and who
she's trying to
masking.
Be part of that group in a sense, or portray herself as part of that group. And
it's
part
like,
of it is,
you're not that.
Yeah.
And then there's another group that is gender nonconforming and not within the normal bounds of conventional attractiveness, and because of that tend to have a lot of very serious social issues that aren't autism.
Yeah.
But they're like, masking, this is what's actually gone down. I don't have any external presenting signs of autism. However, I have all the social difficulties that go along with it. Why am I having these social difficulties? And it's like, well, the answer to this can probably be found in like Andrea Dworkin more than it can be found in the DSM.
Yeah.
Or let's be honest here. You might need to just hit the Radfem reading library for a bit to maybe understand a bit more of what's going on. What you are experiencing is something called misogyny.
Yes.
This is not autism. Crucially, you are not experiencing autism. You are experiencing social ostracization because the world is very dickish to women who do not conform to femininity standards and who do not present as conventionally attractive. I'm sorry, but this is also not autism. You're not experiencing this because you were autistic and you were masking the whole time.
Yeah.
But something she points out is that the autism phenotype becomes unfalsifiable, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, if you don't have any external symptoms, it's not because you don't have autism, it's because you were masking it.
Right.
And it's like, that is a good point.
She's just not masking. Like, that's what's it's just interesting. It's because a lot of women who think they have the phenotype either don't have it or aren't masking as well as they think they are. And, we really need to save that for masking discourse at some point for a different episode, just because that's its whole thing. But it is very obvious where she's like falling into this trap. And it was like a sort of aha moment when I realized, oh, she's like, because I was wondering, why does she think she's so like camouflaged? I was like, oh, she's pretty.
And it's like, I'm sorry, but she's not camouflaged at all.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
right.
I mean, I'm so glad that she developed social skills in her 30s.
I'm glad she did that.
Go queen.
I'm glad she got a journalism career. Even if I very much disagree with what she's reporting.
I'm super happy that she managed to claw her way out of toxic online neurodiversity communities. I'm all for that stuff. But it's like, okay, but also, you're not actually part of the group that you think you're part of. You are part of the irony of all of this is that there are people who are wrong about their autism diagnosis. She's just not one of them.
The thing is, people who are wrong about it they're not going to write these kinds of articles. They're not going to do these types of things because they don't have any real incentive to do so. There's just they don't have the really have the have to deal with they get all the benefits without really a lot of the downsides. So they don't have an incentive to say I'm not autistic. I was a misdiagnosis. There's just no incentive for it. But yeah, so the only person who's going to be doing that is someone who started building up social skills, is a little better at handling themselves now, and really doesn't want to be autistic anymore.
But like, the thing is, she has a long history.
Yes.
That she self-describes as having.
Yeah.
And it's like her rationale for why she's not autistic is because she started getting a lot better with people in her 30s. And it's like, most of us do.
Yeah.
Most of us manage to figure it out after 10, 15 years, if you don't have any other like cognitive impairments.
Yeah.
Like, just if you have a normal range of intelligence, you will probably figure it out if you try. If you just put in the effort to learn, after 10, 15 years,
yeah.
you'll figure it out. It will be hard. You won't be great at it, but you will figure it out you will be able to fly under most people's radars.
You'll get to a point where people are like, oh, that eccentric person who's, like, if you can make yourself into just like a quirky, enjoyable person to just be around at certain occasions. Like it's a thing that people have done for a long time, so
yeah. And it's like, I'm sorry, but developing social skills in your 30s is not evidence that you don't have autism.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how else to say it. It's just like, a person with social delays and social deficits had social delays caused by social deficits. More like, this is a very dog bites man story here. And like, she points out a very valid thing, which is we have no objective test for autism. And it's true. Like, true. So true. But also, yeah, clinicians also do sometimes overlook things like trauma and anxiety, but also sometimes they don't. Sometimes they diagnose you even though you have trauma and anxiety, because the shoe fits. Right. It's like, the shoe fits here. But there is another sort of cohort out there who has CPTSD, or who has a personality disorder, or another thing like that, who gets diagnosed with autism because the clinician was like neurodiversity affirming, and they like shopped around for it. There's currently a scandal going on with a website called Embrace Autism here in Canada, which is run by a naturopath who gives you basically naturopathic autism diagnoses, which are not usable by any insurance provider here in Canada. But anyway, there are many clinicians out there who call themselves neurodiversity affirming, who will basically just rubber stamp a diagnosis and not do differentials and not look for other things. And you get cases where, like, I call it autism by proxy, where you have just spouses who become more autistic over time because they start to adopt their spouse's mannerisms. That person does not have autism. That person has a case of living with autistic people. Or, like, they have trauma and social anxiety and a whole bunch of things that cause similar social dysfunctions. Or they just have OCD, but they don't have autism, and they haven't been diagnosed with just OCD. And they have all the social issues that come with maladaptive OCD that you have not treated. And they go, oh, you have autism. And they get misdiagnosed. This stuff happens because there is no blood test, and because there are no objective markers, and because we're only looking at external symptoms. But again, this also applies to, like, her whole thing is like, autism should be diagnosed for the most severe.
You,
This applies to the most severe. There
yeah,
is also no objective test for the most severe autistics. There is no unified genetic strain. There's no unified genetic pathway. The most severe and the most profound also don't have objective tests.
you can
So,
make
like,
this
is it
argument for a
working?
lot of mental illnesses. Like there's
Yes.
really severe like you can have very severe, what seems like very severe schizophrenia, and it can turn out like in rare cases that's actually an autoimmune disease and you don't actually have typical schizophrenia. And those are severe cases, and you would think if you restricted that, if schizophrenia to just the most severe, you would actually probably get a lot of people who don't have schizophrenia. And so the same thing is for autism, the same thing is for a lot of disorders in the DSM, where if you only restricted it to the most severe, you would probably get a lot of things that are actually quite classifiable as something else. Because when you have an actual physical problem, it can be very in your brain, that is very severe. It's actually a lot more likely to be mental illness, or at least when it's not as like majorly severe. I mean, this is just like a lot of the time, because if it is a physical illness, it's going to start like it usually affects you in a worse way. I don't know how, like if I'm explaining this correctly, but yeah.
No, like you are, and a really good example of this is Fragile X. So
Yes.
Fragile X, like 70% of males, or something like that. I don't know if that's the exact number, but 70% of males with Fragile X meet the diagnostic criteria for ASD3, and that's not ASD3,
It's
right?
the
Just and however, if you didn't have that one particular biomarker that we managed to find and isolate, that would still be ASD3. And
right. And they tend to keep the ASD diagnosis for insurance reasons,
yeah,
at least in the US, because that's how you get the therapy that people would want for it. So,
yeah.
yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, the no biomarkers, no blood tests and things like that cuts both ways.
Yeah.
And it's not making the point that you think. She then goes on to talk about like the role of identity and how like autism has become a personal brand,
Right.
and it drives advocacy in stupid ways and it traps people. And it's like, yeah, that is true. This has nothing to do with the autism diagnosis.
No.
This is the toxic community that has spawned up around it because there are no good support services for them. So people have just started making things up. Like, you are not, you are dealing with the result of a bunch of people who were kicked into the deep end and told that they need to start swimming or they're going to die.
Yeah.
And so they've built some pretty maladaptive rafts while in the deep end. This has nothing to do with the fact that they have the diagnosis. And like there are absolutely people who will claim autism as an identity who probably don't have it. Who it's like, this is not actually a good description of you, and you are using it as like a personal brand. I suspect several autism coaches of this, mostly because I have tracked their personal social media accounts. One of them actually, in the year 2020, had reached out to me to ask about like why she kept not getting diagnosed. And she's like, I've been to 3 different clinicians and none of them have diagnosed me. Do you know why this is happening?
Mm.
And I said, yes, but you're not going to like the answer. Anyway,
I
she
mean,
got diagnosed 3 years later.
of course you did, because if you shop around long enough, you do get a diagnosis. It's one thing I did find interesting with Christina Buttons is that as soon as she brought out this article, there were a bunch of people who I think were like, oh, maybe she has BPD, because that's the thing that people sort of run to when they assume the assumption is, at least with women, if the who are not typically, which again doesn't really apply to Christina Buttons, but a lot of women who are typically who will there's a lot of claims that women who are claiming to have autism have BPD actually. And what I found interesting is how that intersects with the theory I had about masking and prettiness, because I think BPD is unlike autism. It is associated with prettiness, attractiveness to men, and it shouldn't be. It's a behavior. It's also a set of behaviors. But someone like Christina Buttons, if you only knew, if you only saw, if when people only see pictures of her and haven't watched videos of her, if they know anything about her background, they're immediately going to say, oh, she's probably just got BPD, because BPD a lot of the time means hot crazy girl and not the actual set of like criteria for a BPD diagnosis.
BPD has also gone through internet diagnostic
Yes.
expansion to mean things
Yes,
it
it's
doesn't
gone through a
actually mean.
massive expansion. But I think all personality disorders have, because everyone loves to label the ex they hate as having a personality
Yeah.
disorder.
Yes.
Or their shitty parent as having a personality disorder.
Yeah.
It's probably worse than autism in some respects, simply because you can just throw that around. You can just throw around, my parent has NPD, and people won't push back on that.
And
Um
I will also say there are women who get misdiagnosed with BPD when they do have autism.
Yes, and she seems like the type of person who could have gotten that, because I suspect that misdiagnoses of BPD are like, I guess I do think that's where there's the overlap, because one of these things is associated with these sort of like almost mystical femme fatale figures, and the other is associated with Temple Grandin, which, no disrespect to Temple Grandin, it's just there's two differing stereotypes here, physical
Yeah. One
stereotypes.
is femme fatale and one is like butch.
Butch lesbian
Yeah.
type.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
So
so like there's also other people who I will just add in autism communities
right.
who think all BPD is misdiagnosed autism.
No,
And
that's
that
another
doesn't
thing.
help either.
Oh, I have met, I think, two people in like the community I'm from who fit like what I consider like the BPD like profile. They're both women who had fathers who were Holocaust survivors. So I have no idea if what, but that like that it and it's kind of obvious if you actually meet someone like that. Again, if you know what you're looking for, it's again, and again, it's actually also treatable, but it's very stigmatized, and it is very much something that, like, I understand why people would prefer an autism diagnosis in that scenario,
It
because of
is
how,
unfortunately not
yeah.
helpful if you get an autism
No,
diagnosis
no, it's
because
not. You
the
need an actual like,
yes,
there is actual therapy for it, and you absolutely will not benefit from it. And the thing with autism diagnosis, there isn't a therapy for autism, but there is stuff that they can actually could be recommending for a lot of people who get late
yeah,
diagnosed stuff. I was not there. I could have been recommended occupational therapy. Like, they had a part of my diagnosis was based on the fact that I wasn't eating food correctly. I don't know why they never said, go get this like food issue worked out. There's so much stuff that a lot of people on level 1 have, that really, if you were telling them, go get this looked at, this is something you can like there is this sense of level 1 being just this like, yeah, you're just like this, and go figure
yeah.
it out.
I will also say there are a lot of autistic women who have both BPD and autism.
Yes,
Uh,
because I feel like having autism probably it's not difficult to understand why autism
produce it.
would
Yeah.
predispose you to BPD. It's like the same
Yeah.
way like I developed really bad OCD as a very young child. Probably, maybe, I think it might be genetic in my family, but like, it, I also think it was heavily related to being on the spectrum, because you're not really supposed to, OCD doesn't usually develop at 4 years old, but in my case it
Yeah.
developed at 4 years old. Yeah.
And so like you get this very very sort of complicated confluence
Yeah.
of a bunch of things that are going on and
When
she
you get into the
identifies some of them.
community, yeah, and she's right that you go into these communities and they portray everything as autism. They don't tell you to get better. If you tell them you're getting better, you get pushback. At least that's my
Yeah.
experience.
Yep.
You tell them that there are things you can do to make these things better. You get a lot of pushback because the way that they're handling the community is by coping, and a lot of that cope is, I don't need to do anything. I don't need to get better. I can just
Yeah.
embrace
And
it.
I can't do anything.
Right.
And doing something about it would be bad, and it
Will
would
be
be
conversion
morally wrong.
therapy.
Yeah, yeah. And
Uh,
it's just like, this is not true. You should work on yourself.
yeah.
You
And
should recognize there are some hard limits that you're going to keep running up against, but like, also, self-improvement's a good thing. You should do
yeah,
that.
yeah, you have a brain, you can use it. This is what my dad would always tell me when I was struggling when I was younger. Like, God, you're really smart. Like I used to resent that, but I get what he was telling me now.
Yeah.
Um, and I do want to just bring back to the interview. What's interesting about that interview then is that she dovetails from this discussion about autism to a discussion about Gavin Newsom's policies in California. Um,
Yeah.
and it's and that's clearly like what was interesting about it was like, oh, this is what you really wanted to talk about. You really wanted to talk about these different policies in California around mental health that you object to and are. I found that part particularly enlightening. Of oh, okay,
Yeah,
because
it
it
again reminded me a lot of detransition narratives
right,
where they're talking about it, and instead of it being like, hey, we need better safeguards or
yeah,
whatever, or we need to gatekeep things a little more, or we need better protocols, the
yeah.
narrative goes into, and that's why we need to destroy gender ideology, which is bringing
Right.
communism. And
Because
it's
a
like,
lot of it is
ooh,
them being mad at an ideology or a community or a way of like, and she's clearly not. Oh, and they do mention communism
they
in that
do.
interview, and it comes out of nowhere, and it's oh god,
Kind of funny.
it is funny that like all these years later, people are still bringing up the specter of communism. Like no one is actually trying to genuinely implement communism in the U.S. That everything that you think is communism has nothing to do with like
I've read a lot of Robert Chapman.
yeah.
I disagree. I think the neurodiversity departments are forming a Marxist-Leninist vanguard. They're
Any
gonna
day
get you.
now. Any day
Yeah,
now. There are a lot of people who definitely think what they're doing is achieving communism. It's not,
yeah,
or it's not going to. California is a really, really capitalist state.
yeah,
It is probably next to like New York City. But it was interesting that she clearly wanted to talk more like that. She was clearly even far more engaged when talking about Gavin Newsom's policies on mental health, how she and their effect on teenagers in high schools. She was, I don't know. It's, and what was interesting is I, I was trying to formulate this, but it is very much a broader part of this sort of right wing / heterodox omnicause, where psychiatry and how to handle therapy has become a big part of that. And I think that's it's just an interesting yeah.
I had in my notes, it gives the game away.
Yeah.
And like, it's like, okay, what are we really doing here?
Yeah.
I also had that sense. Another thing that she brings up, which is a point I've brought up, is that the way that we talk about autism has ramifications, and it has
Yes.
ramifications for the most severe people.
Hmm.
I've been pretty consistent on this podcast about saying that. However, this is one of those places where like she gets 70% of the way there and just spikes the ball and it's like, girl, you have not hit the touchdown yet. Stop celebrating. You are actually making a crucial mistake here because you kind of don't understand what you're talking about. And so like she sort of starts, she basically says my conception of autism was severe autism, with the new understanding that, but there's this new understanding, and the new understanding includes milder traits. We've already gone over why that's wrong,
Yeah.
historically illiterate, but also it's like a lot of these people are self-diagnosed. They're not in the system.
They're
A
not
lot of,
taking any
yes,
resources. What they're doing is if they're doing harm, it's mostly due to campaigning against resources that would also help people with level 1, but like
yes,
uh, in some
So she
cases.
talks about diagnostic services.
Yes.
The diagnostic services for adults
Yeah.
who are in this target of people that she's complaining about aren't the same as diagnostic services for
Yes.
children. These are different streams. Pediatric medicine is not adult psychiatry,
And
or yeah.
she's like, she does mention, oh, they don't want to fund ABA. Like, she doesn't even, which is really the least of it, because she doesn't even mention the really agreed. Like, again, the fact that she doesn't really seem to, she's using like a sort of very broad stereotype, so she doesn't actually know what the actual harms that a lot of these like groups like Asan are actually doing, which is they're like making it harder for, like, they're campaigning against any forms of like guardianship or necessary, institutionalization,
Or group homes,
or group
like
homes.
basic group homes, intentional communities, and
Right.
being like, no, screw these people.
No,
And,
you have to.
like, she brings up research. I think that's the only valid one in her
Oh,
complaint.
like the Spectrum 10K thing, like
Well,
what they shut
no,
down research. Oh, right,
no,
when they
about how now we have all these milder cases.
right,
Research is being done on the mild cases and not on the more severe ones. I
right.
think that's a valid complaint.
It is.
I think that is a reasonable complaint to make. And also that a lot of the people who really need studies in ASD1 aren't being represented in those studies because
Mhm.
the most mild cases of ASD1 are the ones being used. And you get studies coming out saying things like autistic people don't struggle with communication, new study finds. And it's
Yes.
like, okay, you either got the least autistic people in your sample set, your methodology is garbage, or at some point someone wrote down the wrong findings. And it is a lot of the new unmasked autists coming in who just very clearly don't have autism. uh, like them entering trials is going to make research on
Oh
ASD1
God.
worse. And like it,
It's
this is
going.
something this is something I have recorded in my autism research. Like I have a clustering system. Before 2020, I had clusters A through K. After 2020, I had to make LMNOP. So anyway,
Oh.
I had to make a whole bunch of new clusters to account for people who either have very mild autism, who are actually just BAP, or who have confused their symptoms for something else with autism, because they don't fit any of the buckets that I have. And it's like, why in 2020 am I getting new buckets? And it was just like COVID hit
Yeah.
and
People were on
everyone
online.
got real weird in isolation. And that had some effects. I'll just say. And like, these people absolutely have deteriorating mental health. They
Yeah.
absolutely have trauma. They have something going on with them. They don't have anything in common, or they have the only things they have in common for the very well established A through K group is very superficial things. And like, you can just tell when you're talking to an autistic person who is describing their life experience and someone who is trying to describe other people's life experiences that they've seen on TikTok. um, because they say very weird things when you ask follow-up questions that they weren't rehearsed or
Expecting.
prepared for.
Oh.
And so you ask about like, well, what was this aspect of your internal experience like? And there is like a way that autistic people answer the question like every time, and they go completely in another direction, and then you just follow up on that and keep asking questions, and it's like, okay, yeah, so this is not, you have not autism because I don't know what this is.
What I think is interesting is that, like, she mentions that when people study autism, the stuff that actually does come up for genetics is usually like for level 3, and for she doesn't really extrapolate that to me to get that, like, this influx of people coming in is not necessarily gonna hurt. I mean, it might hurt level 3 in multiple ways. But when it comes to research, the people they're probably hurting most is level 1 because level 3 are usually people who are severely affected. And if they're severely affected, there's usually something there that's there to find. If it's your level 1, it's a lot harder to actually figure out what is there genetically, what little, like, 'cause the whatever markers there are going to be not as obvious, not as they're going to be clusters, they're not going to be like monogenetic things. So obviously it's going to hurt level 3. Level 1 is actually probably going to be more impacted by this influx
Yes.
because it's very hard. It gets very hard to isolate the actual like group that you're describing.
It's research projects like mine that
Right.
that get dinged the most by hordes of
Yeah.
self-diagnosed people who self-diagnosed on TikTok.
Yeah.
Another thing is, again, because she doesn't acknowledge that ASD3 has also broadened,
Yeah.
she doesn't talk about the effect that the broadening of ASD3 has on ASD3 research.
Because then you have these like multiple genes that are being found for very
Yes.
different intellectual
Yes.
disabilities.
And
And whether they
like,
have something to do with autism or not is difficult to, like, she assumes that these are autism genes, and
yes.
that may not be the case. They may be genes that interact with autism that cause like they're not autism genes. Fragile X is not an autism gene. Like MECP2 is not an autism gene. They are genes
SYNGAP1, not
associated with
autism gene.
no, none of these are
That's
autism genes. There is
yes.
no one has found an autism gene. We have found like disorders that are heavily correlated with autism.
Yeah, we have found polygenetic risk factors.
Yes.
and that's what we have. And it's just like she doesn't seem to be like, there is absolutely a totally valid critique of a bunch of people who are not severely affected or severely impacted by autism calling themselves autism, injecting themselves into the diagnosis, making the conversation about themselves, and leaving behind the most severely affected at levels 1, 2, and 3. This is happening. This is bad. I've talked about it all the time. It impacts research. It impacts policy. It impacts public perception. It diverts public sympathy away, right? Where you want public attention on these most severe cases, but they're not very palatable. But
Yeah.
it is palatable when your like favorite comedian comes up and is like, I have autism, right? These things do have an effect, and I don't want to downplay it. I just want to mark that she doesn't do a particularly good job at analyzing these effects. And so related to that is her talking about diagnosis being self-limiting. And this was one of the most frustrating things that I encountered in her spiel, because you are confusing the autism diagnosis for your own shitty attitude about your autism diagnosis. Again, I do not blame you for developing that attitude, because that's what you get thrust into when you are working with the online autism community. I don't blame you for developing the idea that diagnosis is self-limiting, but it does not have to be self-limiting. Diagnosis can basically just be a checklist of things that are wrong with you that you need to improve. If you want to talk about self-improvement, which is going to be easier? Self-improvement, if you have a list of things that you actually need to improve. Self-improvement in a situation in which you now have the conceptual toolkit to understand that your self-perception is going to be skewed and that your social perception is going to be skewed. So you shouldn't rely on your own intuitions to self-analyze these types of things and should instead rely on other people. How is that going to self-limit you
I
if
will
you
say
just know more?
it is much more self-limiting to not know it all if you
Yes.
have it. And I know this because I grew up with someone, a grandparent, who I and pretty much the entire family are certain has Asperger's or some kind of undiagnosed Asperger's. He has had very similar symptoms to me. And oh god, he doesn't he's never gone to a psychiatrist over, he's never gotten any diagnosis, there's no self-awareness. And my parents would always emphasize to me, like, the thing that's good about, you think you're lucky about is you have a lot of self-awareness. And I had self-awareness before the diagnosis. The diagnosis was also helpful in at least getting like a point where I could have
Yes.
more self-awareness. But like it is, lack of self-awareness is one of the most debilitating things for people with any mental illness, any neurological condition, because
Yeah.
like it is the reason you have people, it is one of the reasons you have people on the streets, people who are treatment resistant. If you are unself-aware, you cannot adapt, you cannot, you know, like you, and you might be able to adapt, but you will probably make someone else's life miserable in the process, and you will
Yeah.
hurt people in the process. And it of even like if you are successful at all, you will either hurt yourself or you will hurt others if you are not self-aware, and that is a really dangerous thing. It's much more
Yep.
dangerous than overdiagnosis. And I understand the dislike of overdiagnosis. I hate it too. But self-awareness is a really good thing. And
Exactly.
yeah.
Like I at this point in my life cannot be accused of being too enthusiastic about
Yeah.
neurodiversity. I don't think, based on my output thus far, that I could be accused of being too sympathetic to the movement. I regularly encourage people to get diagnosed so that they can self improve,
Yeah.
because like, and I always give that, there's a Sun Tzu quote about, if you, I'll get the exact one so I don't screw it up. Right. So the quote is, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Not knowing you're autistic puts you in the not knowing yourself or your enemy camp.
Yeah.
It does not help to not know these things about you if those things are true,
Yes.
right? If though it it hurts you if those things are not true. If you think you have autism but you have no external symptoms of autism, and you are like, I've just been masking my whole life and now I need to unmask, this is not helpful for you.
Yes.
Like, misdiagnosis does not help people.
But it doesn't help.
Diagnosis
Yeah.
does help you. Like, if you want it to help you, it will help you. If
Right.
you don't want it to help you, and if you want to like become a neurodiversity warrior, go for it. Like, I am not the autism police. I cannot stop you. But the idea that diagnosis can become self-limiting is purely down to your own personal interpretation of that. And this is like, I'm sorry, but this is like girl with personal issues decides that this is a society-wide issue. You know, like, it says a lot about society how none of my friends want to hang out with me. It's like, girl, this is not a society problem. You were confusing your own internal personal issues with society-wide structural systemic issues. Like, you can get in all sorts of places in which people will black pill and like lie down and rot. You can go into incel communities and they will be like diagnosing themselves with negative cancel tilt or whatever, and be like, and this is why I can't get a girlfriend.
Yeah.
And like, it's like, yeah, you won't get a girlfriend if you are
Yeah,
doing that. But like, if you're being a weirdo about your own skull measurements, you're probably
Oh
not going
god.
to get a girlfriend. But also to suggest that the problem with the incels is that they're diagnosing themselves, and not that they are in just like an exceptionally toxic online black
Crabs in a
pilled,
bucket.
yeah,
Like,
crabs in a bucket type of thing. Then yeah, like, you do have problems. But again, this isn't autism.
yes. And I think a lot of like the discussion about overdiagnosis tends to get really conflated with overtreatment, which they're sort of two separate things. Like
Yep.
overtreatment, like sometimes, like for example, like when people talk about like overdiagnosis of something like cancer, which sometimes spontaneous, like certain like cancers, if you detect them really early enough, sometimes they're so early they're going to spontaneously go away, and chemotherapy might not be useful. Over treatment is an issue. Overtreatment is an issue in psychiatry, but like I think I was overtreated massively when I was a teenager. One thing that actually prevented that overtreatment was getting an autism diagnosis, because it got me removed from a psychiatrist who was obsessed with putting me on different like things, including antipsychotics. Like an autism diagnosis, the one thing it did for me before I actually, even while I was still in neurodiversity, and even while I was still like in this mindset of nothing's wrong with me, or I shouldn't have to do anything, it still helped because it got me out of an overtreatment situation. Like that is a very useful thing that a diagnosis can do, because once they realize, oh, this person doesn't have bipolar disorder, she doesn't have any like latent schizophrenia, this is autism, you won't have to be on medication that you don't need. And being over medicated medication is great when it can be helpful, but over medication is a big problem. And I suspect a lot of the relief that can come for a lot of people from autism is the realization of like you might not have to be on certain medications because you're not psychotic. I don't know. That's a part of it. And so like it gets
Exactly.
conflated heavily. So, and that's actually like the thing, going back to the detransitioners, is I don't think people like a lot of what gets conflated in these arguments is trans identity versus the actual treatment itself. Whether or not like you need the treatment itself is probably a different question than how do you identify, what do you feel inside. Like those are related, but a lot of people see this as like this one big thing, and a lot of the time it isn't. There's overdiagnosis and over identifying with things. There's also over treatment. And
Yes.
Sorry.
And there's also no differentiation between self-diagnosed and actual diagnosed.
Yes.
Like she talks about these things as like online autistic communities.
Yes.
And it's like, girl, I survey those. Half the people don't have a diagnosis. Like
Yeah.
there is no overdiagnosis here because they're literally not diagnosed with anything. And like she goes on and starts critiquing the autism community, right? And the online autism community. And I mean, it's just like, I don't know if it's the narcissism of small differences, but I'm just like, girl, there is a way to do this well, and you are not. I don't know how else to say it. Like, she does point out valid things, like, you know, neurodiversity pride stuff, and like rejecting any sense of a cure, and being like, this is literally eugenics to do anything. It's all very stupid, which is a valid thing to bring up. And like, a lot of them attack interventions that are designed for non-verbal autistics and not them. And then, you know, also just like there's a valorization of not doing things.
Yes.
Like,
and a valorization of cognitive rigidity as like and the other maladaptive aspects of autism, which are, you know, sometimes these things can be useful, but you really got to be aware of them.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it's going to turn into some very bad stuff if you're not careful.
Yes. And and like she also talks about how like autism has become a social status or social currency in some online communities. It absolutely has. A lot of people pretend it hasn't because it's sort of awkward to admit that it has. It absolutely does. You know, people will say like being gay or being queer has social currency in certain places, and people will be like, no, it absolutely doesn't. Look at how badly treated queer people are. And it's like, this is two of these things can be true at once.
Yes.
Broader society does not treat you well, but within very specific niches, this is a status marker. And autism is seen as like a status marker. And if you look at how autism is talked about in online autism communities, why wouldn't you want it? Like, this sounds awesome, right? If you only got your idea, it's like, wow, we're just these honest beacons of truth and light, and we never do anything wrong, and everything we do actually has really really cool, coherent explanations. And like, you know, we're just so fun to hang around with. And
Yeah.
if you like hanging around with me, you're probably autistic as
They're
well. And
literally
you
the
know,
X-Men.
yes,
That's
yes. God.
yeah.
Yeah, so like this happens. It's stupid. This is, you know, there's lots of things related to that, and just like a lot of interpreting normal benign behaviors as autism. Like
Yeah.
I swear to God, half of the hashtag relatable autism content online is like, did you know autistic people don't like being stabbed with knives? And it's like, yeah, I did know that actually. And like I frequently get into it with neurodiversity influencers when I'm like, this is an autism, this is a normal human experience that you are experiencing because you are a human, not because you have autism. Like I remember someone was like, oh yeah, listening to a song on repeat all the
Oh my
time is a
god.
sign of autism. And it's like, okay, listening to the same song on repeat for 5 years in a row, that might be a sign.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah, like,
like that level of repetition.
if you're
But
doing the Brian Wilson thing of listening to "Be My Baby," like, we was listening to, like, "Be My Baby" over and over again for 20 years, maybe I could
yeah,
make that
yeah,
argument.
maybe that's something to look into. But having favorite songs that you like to listen to a lot,
Yeah.
it's not autism. That's it's called liking music. It's a very normal thing for you to do. And so like there's lots of pathologization of normal traits as really autism traits. And it's like, yeah, fair enough. This is stupid and annoying. But again, what does this have to do with actual autism
Right.
diagnosis? Nothing. Nothing. This is complaining about how people are being stupid about it, not about the whole claim of the article
Right.
or the interview, which is that this is being misdiagnosed and misunderstood. And it's like, not really. Like, no clinician who doesn't suck at their job and isn't like committing several types of medical
Felonies.
malpractice is going to be saying those types of things that you
Right.
find on autism places. And it's like, how much of this is you actually getting mad at real things, and how much of this is you getting mad at like things you find annoying online?
A lot
Perfectly
of the
fine. You can get mad at things you find annoying online. Like I do it
I
all the
do all the
time.
time. No, but, like, I think a lot of the problem is people have a difficult time trying to, because the internet is not real life, but it does affect real life. It's hard for people to sort of, like, a lot of people do not seem to know how to explain, like, why you should care about these internet dramas and online dramas. And they do affect things. They affect people, they affect people's mental health, they can clog up systems, they can do, like, bad things. But you have to be like, do a good job of discerning, okay, what's online drama and what are the real world consequences of it. And people are very bad at this a lot of the time because they immediately just collapse the two into one thing, and not and that is kind of what she's doing here, which is taking this online atmosphere, collapsing it with its real life consequences, and then just
Yeah,
assuming
and
it's this
failing to
new.
disambiguate,
Yes.
and just like not doing careful analysis that you should be doing before you go make these statements to millions of people.
Right.
And you know, she brings up the connections to gender dysphoria, and she talks about like there's this pipeline that where, you know, the is autism a social contagion? Yes. And it's like there's a really interesting technical discussion about what social contagion is and how it
Yeah.
works and how it functions, because technically, yeah, autism is socially contagious in the sense that, like, statistically speaking, if you personally know me, you are more likely to be diagnosed with autism than if
Right.
you don't know me. Because I know a lot about autism, and I'm going to probably tell you to get your kid diagnosed if I start seeing signs that other people might miss. Right? And so like there are lots of these actual interesting effects. Or everyone in your friend group, their kids start getting diagnosed. And so you go, oh, why are all our kids getting autism? Like, why is all of my college friends, why are all their kids getting autism? And then you start going, oh, I think we all had autism. And so in a sense, this is social contagion, right? There's a lot of really interesting discussions to be had about autism, how we think about autism, what autism is, and the roles of the sort of societal level social layer that play into it. She is doing none of that.
No,
Right? Like she's just being like, yeah, this is a social contagion, just like transgender
because
is a social
they
contagion.
sort of mix up social contagion with mass sociogenic illness a lot of the
Yes.
time. The
Yes.
assumption is that a social contagion is the exact same thing as all like when a bunch of like all those people who started dancing in France in the 16th century, you know, and couldn't stop dancing. Um
Yep.
you know, like that it's the dancing plague, it's these like mass soci it's Havana syndrome, it's the exact same thing. uh and a social contagion doesn't necessarily mean that. It could mean that. It doesn't always mean
Yeah.
that. It, you know.
Social contagions for real things happen all the time. And it's like social contagion is also just like it is a very interesting way of statistically modeling things that happen and why things happen. And there are it's also interesting to think about how like the way that we think about autism influences the diagnosis of autism, and the way that that then includes more autistic people, which changes the way we think, which changes the way anyway, many really interesting conversations to be had are not
Yes.
had here
Yeah.
because we're trying to like shoehorn in this ideological point. And it's like, again, you get so close to making an interesting point, get 70% of the way there, and then the last 30% is like, oh, what are we doing here? Like, and you know, she brings in explicit links to transgender healthcare, which just like don't actually apply to autism, and like just and it's like some of the things, it's like, yeah, the rewarding of pathology narratives, or becoming really attached to your diagnosis, or getting emotionally intertwined with your identity in a way that's not helpful. All these things, it's like there is such an interesting and good point to be made here, and such a useful ground for fertile conversation and like talking about very serious issues, and it's just not had. And it's not had because there's this desire to get in the certain narrative. And again, the funniest thing about this entire discourse, as you pointed out before, is that she's like, I'm not actually autistic, I was something else. And that applies to a group of people in this discourse, and she's not one of them.
Yeah.
It's anyway,
It's
it is a genuinely like, you aren't actually one of you aren't one of the
yeah.
people who can actually detransition from having autism, or
Yeah.
to genuinely claim you were misdiagnosed, or that the diagnosis isn't accurate and isn't describing something. Like, you're throughout this whole thing, I was just like, your problem fundamentally has nothing to do with autism. Your problem fundamentally has everything to do with you finding the autistic community annoying.
Yeah.
Which, like,
Most
fair enough, brother. I'm right there with you.
oh.
like you and I both have lived many years being deeply annoyed by these people. And so, like, I can't fault a guy for hating, but at a certain point, if you're going to be doing hating, you need to actually like think about what you're saying before you say it. Like, your critiques have to be accurate. You have to land them. There are so many good ways of critiquing the neurodiversity movement, and doing bad critique makes your case worse. You actively shoot yourself and your other people who are trying to accomplish the thing that you're trying to accomplish, you actively shoot yourself in the foot by saying things like, you
like
know,
that.
like implying that mild autism is just this new form of autism that was never there before.
Mm-hmm.
This can be fact checked by
Yes.
literally reading any book about autism, about the history of autism diagnosis. You will immediately learn that you have this flipped,
Yeah.
that you have it the wrong way around, and that this is like, anyway, it's, yeah, the overall pattern that I found is like, you find the online neurodiversity community, its tie-ins with progressive politics, the sort of ideological underpinnings that they smuggle in, the toxic online discourses they create, and all that type of stuff. You are frustrated with it and you don't like it. That's what this is actually about. Right? And then this is about what I think is a broader trend that we are going to see a lot more of, which is neurodiversity backlash. I think I've been talking about this for a year. I will continue talking about it. I'm technically part of it, so you know, like I think we are riding the wave of it, and I actually think it is going to follow certain trends and patterns very similar to anti-trans backlash,
Oh yeah.
including that it's starting in the UK with UK academics,
Of
which is
course it
probably
is.
the funniest feature of it all. It's like the sort of genesis of neurodiversity backlash, that it's actually being done meaningfully, and like where clinicians are starting to push back against neurodiversity narratives, is happening in the UK.
Yeah.
And it's UK based researchers, it's UK based physicians.
Well,
The neurodiversity backlash will be started in the UK.
of course.
The US culture war industry is going to take it in the dumbest possible way that it can possibly think of, and do wildly counterproductive things with the narrative that will ultimately get significantly more play because they have money behind it.
Also, we don't have an NHS, so like the
Yeah.
immediate thing is going to be it turns into culture worship. This is the same thing
Yep.
with the trans stuff, where they have an NHS, they have socialized medicine, they have incentives to investigate and like look through these things. We have a very for-profit medical system, but so what takes the place of oversight is a massive culture war industry.
Yeah.
It's why you see all these culture wars around health and supplements and diets and disorders. It's like our improvised oversight system, and it sucks so much. So
Yes.
yeah.
And my prediction is the ones who are going to take the brunt of the garbage
Yeah.
from this are going to be the people on the ASD1 side who legitimately need help.
Yes.
They are going to be the casualties in this war. And it sucks.
Yeah.
But this is why bad critique matters. And
Yeah.
this is why calling out bad critique as bad critique matters. This
Yeah.
is also why being willing to critique neurodiversity is also important, and to give like cogent critiques of neurodiversity that don't include throwing people with ASD1 under the bus. I think that is the wrong way to go about this. I am very deeply concerned about the way that people with ASD1 who have a very serious disability that needs attention and needs support and needs services I'm worried they are going to get caught up in the culture war. And the guys like me are going to be fine. Ari Neiman is going to be fine. Most of Asan and their board is going to be fine.
I think someone like 17-year-old me would not be fine in this.
Exactly.
I just think of myself back in my teenage years, and I needed that diagnosis as much as I didn't really utilize it well at the time. So
yeah, and like I needed it too when I was 16. Yeah. I needed someone to tell me I had Asperger's, and I needed to believe I had it.
Yeah.
Because that was the goal to pulling myself out of the hole I was in. and I didn't do it well to start with, and oh boy, could I have done it better. But like anyway, this
No.
is
Yeah.
there is a lot of use to neurodiversity pushback. I think it has long lived its purpose and is now sort of in the solution looking for a problem category of things, and that solutions in search of a problem end up creating their
More
own problems. and we are currently trying to deal with one of those problems, and I think the way to handle it is to try to get in front of the bus with good critique instead of whatever it is that Christina Buttons is putting out. Unfortunately, she has reach. The free press is massive. It's got a lot of readers and a lot of readers with influence, and the Jeremy Boring also has a lot. Complex, nuanced critiques will probably not make the light of day, but all we can do is scream into the void. So that's what we're doing here. Do you have anything else you wanted to add before we wrap it up?
No, I think you summed it all up pretty much.
Cool. All right. You can find me, Christianity on the Spectrum, at gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter at ChristianityOn. You can find me on Blue Sky at christianityon.bluesky.social. And you can find me on Substack at ChristianityOn and Dispatches from the Autism Wars. Etana, do you want to?
Yeah, you can find me at Etana Rachel on Twitter or x.com. You can find me at that same name on Substack, and you can find me at bibliophilia94.bluesky.social. I always forget what my Blue Sky name is because I go on it, but I just don't remember it. But yeah, so, and always a pleasure to be on, and let me know the next time something really stupid happens.
Well, we're going to have to do. I've almost got all the notes in line that I need to get in line for the Judaism episode.
Okay, yeah, we need to do that.
And then masking, and then the masking episode as well.
That's going to be a big thing.
You're not done yet. Get back in the podcast minds. All right. Yeah, thanks for coming on.